Hi, I'm Lance Lambert. Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Vehicle Show. We are in Anaheim, California at the Astor Classic Museum and Events Center. This is a collection of 270 of the finest automobiles you'll ever see. And I might say they are all #1 condition. This is really good stuff here. You're going to get a chance to take a look at these cars and meet Mr. Astor himself. But I'd just like to point out the car that I'm sitting in is the car that was used in the movie To Catch a Thief. This is the car that Grace Kelly and Cary Grant rode around in. Grace Kelly actually sat where I am and used this steering wheel, so it's pretty exciting. We're going to find out more about this car, and let's do that by meeting Mr. Astor. Art Astor, what an amazing collection you have here. This is what a facility. How'd this all come about?
Well, it was a kind of a wonderful feeling about automobiles and being car crazy since I was probably 6, 7 years old. So I've been a car nut for a long time, and I collected a few cars 30, 35 years ago. In fact, in 1960, I believe 66, I got my third car, which is my extra car, which is an XK150 sports car. I drove on the weekends, and then I had a Lincoln Continental sedan for business, and my wife had a Country Squire, perfect family unit. So I started to get into early Mustangs in the late 60s, early 70s, the vintage Mustangs. In fact, I had a Mustang business by 1977 called Mustang Classics. And we sold and restored a few vintage Mustangs. And then I started collecting a few of those for openers. And pretty soon I had to get a warehouse. So by 1980, I got a little warehouse of 2,000 square feet. And I moved eventually buying a few cars into 4,000, 6,000. And then I got a huge place for 12,000 square feet. And then eventually matriculated here where we picked up about 20,000 square feet. And last year we had an opportunity to pick up another 70 or 80,000. So we have about 100,000 square feet of space that we've filled pretty quickly.
100,000 square feet of beautiful cars, 270 of them, right?
275 and maybe a little more right now. I think we're close to 280 and the last count.
Well, speaking of great cars, this is really nice. The car that I just got out of and from the movie To Catch a Thief. Pretty neat to be able to sit in this car. How did you get this car?
Well, this was offered to me by a sports car company, in fact, in Santa Monica, who acquired it from somebody back east who obviously got the car by means, I think, through an auction. And they told me it was a car used for To Catch a Thief. And I remember when I was a young salesman, I saw the Sunbeam Alpine, which this is. And I thought, well, it's a typical little foreign import, doesn't amount to much. And I wasn't into sports cars in the early 50s, more into Fords and Chevys and Plymouths. But when I acquired the car, I drove it, and to drive it is to love it. It's a great driving car. Had I known it in 1953, I'd probably bought one.
Yeah.
But it is a wonderful car to drive and very aerodynamic and a beautiful design for being 53 years old.
Yeah, it's a comfortable car. Well, one car down, 274 to go. Shall we take a look?
Why not?
All right.
Let's go.
Art, a 1961 Jag X150. This is a pretty sexy ride. What's the story on this car?
Well, it's an XK150. They use only X on the modern cars today.
Okay.
X5s and whatever. But this car is one of the last XK150s off the line and came to this country in 1961. And I saw this car actually come off the truck and go to Charles Hornberg's warehouse in Hollywood. And I was a young salesman. I saw it coming off the truck. And true story, I said, boy, this is a honey. He said, it's the very last XK150 drop head Jaguar, and the E-types are coming in within the next few months. So I said, all right, to buy it. Long story short, I called Brentwood Motors, which is the Santa Monica version, Brentwood version of the Charles Hornberg dealership. And they said, it's the last one. We're getting about $3,000 to $4,000 over sticker. And of course, I faded complete in the woodwork about that time. I couldn't afford it. And lo and behold, about 40 years later, this came to my attention. I could tell the car has a special color. It's not British racing green. It's a special green that the guy ordered. And so Being very special, I recognized the car. It was from Brentwood Motors, has the license plate frames on it, and he bought it from the original owner, and I got it from the second owner, which has been pretty thrilling to me. One of my favorite cars.
Jaguars have always, I think, had the image of being, you know, definitely half a dozen steps up above the average, you know, really exotic cars, real classy cars. For 1961, you compare this to any 1961 American automobile, there's, you know, they're worlds apart. Why do you think it is that Jaguar was so successful in keeping the elegance that they do to this day?
Well, a man by the name of William Lyon was very instrumental in the design and engineering of this early Jaguars. He started the SS company, which is a sidecar company, and got into Jaguars as a performance car for the English roads. And the body design came out, actually, the similar body design in 1949 with the first XK150. Now, they didn't make that many of these. People bought them because it was driving something different than a Cadillac or a Ford or a Mercury, a convertible. Had distinctive lines, very streamlined, high performance, 6-cylinder, but high performance cam in it, and you became a distinguished driver overnight by having a Jaguar.
Right.
My first one was 1960, which was a 59 XK150, and I was just an ordinary guy, but I was distinguished by my automobile.
What kind of reaction was there? Way back, I had a real nice Mercedes, and I could tell the difference in reaction from people when I would arrive, wherever I would arrive in that car. Is that what you ran across?
Well, it immediately you became very sophisticated, and I know when I would go to a restaurant with a customer or some friend, when I go to a parking lot of the Tail of the Cock in La Cienega or a very fine restaurant, they would automatically park in front. And one day I said, gee, would you mind just parking so it's not going to be crushed in a back lot? He said, this qualifies, no problem. So I knew right then that a distinguished automobile gets you a good parking place, a lot of friends, a lot of thumbs up, and a lot of winks from the girls.
Right. Well, back home, one of my cars is a 58 Rambler American. I get no winks. I don't get to park in front of the, I do get in the back where the crushed cars are. So.
Well, that's the difference.
Yeah. This certainly is a great example of elegance. A 1927 Rolls Royce. Tell us about this car.
Well, this is a actually called a Springfield car, built in the United States, purchased in 1927 by Tom Mix, the old cowboy, a star of silent film, and made films actually through the 30s. Made a lot of money, loved automobiles. And this is one of his favorite cars. It was so much of a favorite that by 1932 he wanted to modernize it. And he modernized it through the efforts of Bowman and Schwartz, custom body company in Pasadena. And he had skirts made for the fenders. He dropped the headlights and put the roll-up windows in the doors, which he didn't have as a Roadster. Put a radio in the dashboard. In-dash radio is very big. So completely went over the car, and it has its present form since 1932.
This is the king of anything radio right here. Not only are there radios here in the museum, it's an incredible collection of radios here, and you've had a nice business over the years being in the radio business. So how did you, I mean, it's a natural that you want to have radios in here, but boy, you have a lot of radios in here. How did that all come about?
Well, I was a radio nut when I was a kid also, so I had two real passions, automobiles and radios, because radio was going pretty strong before television. And in the 30s and 40s, radio was king. And I remember my folks had an old radio, it was battery operated, and I thought, well, you had to modernize it, Dad. So one day a salesman knocked on the door and says, I'm going to leave this beautiful Philco, 1935 Philco, all modern, in your home for a week. Talk about merchandising at no charge, and if you like it, you can keep it. If you don't, we'll take it away. Well, we listened to a lot of radio, and I became fantasized by it and a fanatic of radio, and then I got in the radio business outside of my university training in communications, so got lucky enough to be in the business for 50 years. And part of that emblematic sense of devotion and passion for radio, I collected old radios. Mm-hmm. And that kind of became one of my hobbies. And I've enjoyed the workmanship and the wood and all the elements of its early performance, especially in the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Some of them look like cars.
Well, yeah, they're pretty big and very expensive. We got radios that were as high as maybe $1,000, $1,200 in the late 30s, early 40s. Wow. A lot of money for a radio. Yeah. Buy a new car for that.
Right. And then you also got into televisions and telephones.
Right. My early years, I was in television for a couple of years, had my own show, and that represented something special to me, especially when I was part of the big screen television. My folks saw my first show, I think in 1950, and they said, we could barely see you. I said, well, get a magnifying glass and you can see me better.
What was that first show?
Called Club LT on Channel 9 in Los Angeles. And it was a cross between Happy Days and American Bandstand.
Wow, so Dick
I was a
Clark
host. Yeah, I was the first Dick Clark in 1950 in Los Angeles.
This is a great car, and it's very, this is elegance and sport at the same time, but you have another car around the corner that is, well, it's super sport. It's pretty flashy. Can we take a look at that?
Absolutely. Great segue to a super sport car.
All right. Well, the other car was sporty. This is super sport. Tell us about this.
Well, this is an unusual car because it's one of a kind.
One of one.
1965 Chevrolet Malibu SS Super Sport with a 396 cubic inch engine with 375 horsepower. Now, they built 200 hardtops as a special edition Chevrolet SS, and they were only going to keep it to 200, and I understand from the research we've done that the general manager of Chevrolet division was Bunky Knudsen. And Bunky wanted it as a convertible, so they built him a convertible. And then as the time went along, the story goes that Dan Blocker got one of the hard tops for promotion for Bonanza. They were sponsors of the Bonanza show, and so he couldn't get his hat on for public appearances, and believe it or not, some people didn't recognize him without his 10-gallon hat. So he said, well, I need something to get my hat on, so Mr. Knudsen, so take my convertible, I'll take the hardtop, and you can make personal appearances in this car. So that's the story, and it's one of a kind. We've got it, and I don't know if it's worth $100,000 or $1 million, but somewhere in between.
So Bunking Knudsen has sat in this, and Haas Cartwright has sat in this, and not only that, but Lance Lambert of the Vintage Vehicle Television Show. I mean, the value on this car is about to jump by $150,000, or $1.50.
I certainly hope so.
Well, if I had my 10-gallon hat on, I'd probably have to have the top down. A 58 Hudson, a little bit different, not a Rambler, but a Hudson, and what a warm and fuzzy, just fun-looking car. Tell us about this.
Well, it's the last of the Ramblers, and Hudson merged with Nash. And as the ego of a corporate leader would have it, they wanted some Hudsons on the Rambler before they discontinued the mark and became American Motors. So the last 300 of these Ramblers were Hudson Ramblers, and it's very unique and very rare. I haven't seen another one in many, many years, and I bought it because of the fact it's a Hudson.
So in 1957, Nashes were Nashes, and then in 58, they became American Motor Ramblers, right? And then this was the Hudson that merged with all that.
This is one of the last of the individual marks. By 1959, they became American Motors.
This was such an unusual design for 1958. There's nothing that looked like this when you compare it to all the other cars. How do you think this design came about?
Well, Pininfarina did a lot of the Nashes.
From Italy.
And very famous Italian automobile designer, designed a lot of other things. But they went to him, of course, to try to save the Nash automobile. And they got to give it a kind of a continental look, as you can see toward the back, and bring in the tricolors, 3 different color combinations, distinguished interior. So it was basically a Nash, but with some fine design elements, as Mr. Nash's had back in the 50s. So it's one of my favorite cars.
Yeah, I think in 1958, American Motors was a little bit confused about who their buyers were, or they were trying to make that transition from, no, we're not just grandma cars, we're hot cars, and this was part of that.
Well, yes. First of all, both Nash and Hudson got a little bit behind in what was hip for the young driver. The yuppies didn't buy Nashes and Hudsons. It was more hip to buy a Mercury, a Ford, or a Chevy, like the SS's or whatever. So it was more of an old person's car. The demos for Nash and Hudson were really very heavy, over 40, 45 years old, as some of the American cars are today. But that was a problem. And then when they brought in Pininfarina, maybe it was a little bit too little too late.
Art, in 1963, I was in high school and I bought a 48 Chev Fleetline Aero sedan. Same body as this, only I didn't have all this wood on the side. Tell us about this car.
Well, first of all, I must tell you that it is all original. It only has 37,000 miles. Beautifully designed cars, you know, if you had one, Fleetline. And during that particular period, Ford got ahead of Chevrolet by coming out with a Sportsman with the wood sides. And Chevrolet, with a little too late again, decided they would do something, but they couldn't do it at the factory. By 1948, though, they decided that there would be an option, dealer-installed wood siding on the Fleetline model. So this is a dealer installation on this car. It's in great shape, as you can see, with only 37,000 miles. The car's interior is all original, still has the plastic covers. Look at the door panels.
It's amazing.
And has a touch-o-matic transmission, and I can still shift this car with one finger.
So that's the vacuum shift.
Vacuum shift.
Yeah. So this wood is not in place of the metal. It's laid on top of the metal.
Laid on top. It's a dealer installation.
Something like this is, I think, the downfall of some of these woodies was the upkeep. You bought these cars, or maybe the people that bought these, that wasn't a concern. They could have that taken care of by somebody else.
Well, I think it's the same thing that happened when the imports came in. The American public would have Ford, Chevys, Oldsmobiles, Pontiacs, and the like, and they would drive the wheels off of these cars. So when it came to wood and woodies, they were the same way, neglect. And they would buy the car because it looked so great, and they would keep it in the driveway or use it on the ranch, and weren't sparingly keeping it in a special place. And unfortunately, most of them, by the first year, the wood was pretty well gone, had to revarnish it. But good people knew the upkeep was important. They would varnish it annually. Other people let it go for 10 years, and those cars are all now dilapidated and gone. But this is an automobile that needed tremendous maintenance and upkeep.
So all those surfer dudes back in the 60s and 70s grabbed them all and made surf wagons out of them.
Yep, you could buy them for next to nothing, and they loved it because of the wood, and their surfboards were wood. So it was a natural kind of a marriage between the woodies and the surfboards.
Your collection here includes a lot of cars that were owned by the A-list male stars from the 30s and 40s. How did that transpire that you were able to get all these cars?
Well, I think they become available, and if they have a celebrity pedigree attached to it, it becomes more desirable, of course. This one came to me through an agent for the seller, and it's an unfortunate story, fortunate for me, unfortunate for him, because the man bought the car, and he's a very heavy-duty businessman, industrialist, as a matter of fact. And he bought the car and spent close to $400,000 restoring it. Wanted to win at Pebble Beach badly. He was invited to Pebble Beach, which is the Valhalla of automobile concourse, and he came in second. Well, after a $400,000 investment, if I came in second, I'd probably go to an asylum. But he got mad enough to want to sell it, and I was a fortunate recipient because the car was purchased by Gary Cooper in 1938 from Hillcrest Cadillac in Beverly Hills. And he bought it without white walls, just the same color. It's kind of Madeira maroon. And Gary Cooper liked it that way because the white walls were a pain to keep clean. He liked to race around with it and not worry about eating the curbs. But it's a V16. They made only 10 of these automobiles totally in 1938. Only a couple exist today. So this is one of them. And when I demoed the car, I just was curious to see if it had any power. And I went into second gear, and the agent says, keep going. So I did about 75 miles an hour in second. I figured it'd be okay.
Yeah.
So I bought the car about 10 minutes after that.
You're happy with it. Back then, when all these cars were being purchased and driven by the movie stars, do you think it was mostly that they bought them because they were beautiful, bought them because they were movie stars and they could, or how many of those people really were car people back then, do you think?
There were quite a few, not a horrendous amount, but people like Clark Gable were big-time collectors, and Gary Cooper loved speed cars. Like Liberace, I remember he had about 8, 9 cars, and he loved to collect cars. So people were interested in, I think, performance, design, speed, and Gary Cooper had Duesenbergs and a lot of sports cars. And at the time, they didn't have sports cars per se. A V16 was a performance car. So several of the key movie stars had automobiles, partly ego, partly money, not knowing what to do with it all.
Well, speaking of performance, in the other room you have a bunch of Chrysler 300s, and those are performance cars. Can we take a look at those?
You bet.
All right. Everybody knows about the Chrysler Hemis and how powerful they were, and everybody wanted those motors back in the 50s and 60s, but they put them in heavy luxury family kind of cars, and then about 1955 they said, let's put this in something that looks a little better and maybe a little bit lighter, and we're going to get some real performance out of these. You have a couple of fantastic examples with these two 1955 Chrysler 300s, so tell us about those.
Well, this is the actual car made for the racing for NASCAR. It's pretty well stripped with anything that would deter from the racing elements of it. No power steering and no particular side view mirrors and some accessories that would add to the drag. So this is specifically made for NASCAR racing. This version over here is the same car, but for commercial sale of the automobile with air conditioning, power steering, and all the accessories, wire wheels, and what have you.
Do you think the buyers in 55 understood what was going on here? Did they sell a lot of these, or did time go by and people went, oh, wait a minute, those 300s were pretty cool? I mean, out of the box, were these really well received by the buyers?
Well, yeah, but remember, they were expensive. I mean, there was a high part of the line and an expensive automobile. And in my experience, corporate heads, CEOs, people with money, even some celebrities would buy these cars. They didn't make that many. They were limited production, and they were expensive for what they were. So it was made in a situation where it came from people who desired performance and individuality, and a car that had a sense of racing history.
Kind of the gentleman hot rodders.
Right.
Yeah.
This is becoming an extremely valuable car, very desirable. The Chrysler 300C 1957 convertible. These are going as high as $250,000 and up. So it's a good investment for people who bought this 10 years ago for maybe $50,000 to $75,000.
And a big car. It's a long ways from here to way back there.
So it's the first year of the big fins, and aerodynamically it was good, but it was a big car. But in those days, everybody drove a big car.
And then they did the Imperial. Of course, that's not a 300, but they went on to try to.
It has a Hemi, though.
It does have a Hemi, but it's not
a Hemi.
Yeah, and
same engine.
And they tried to make Imperial a whole different line of cars, and sort of succeeded at it. But the public kept thinking they were Chrysler Imperials, correct?
Well, I think they identified more with Chrysler than the Imperial. As you may or may not know, the Imperial came out many years ago as an Imperial line, the top of the Chrysler line, but they always called it a Chrysler Imperial. And the mistake was that they didn't start saying, this is an Imperial automobile, completely different than a Chrysler. But the differential was somewhat subtle in those days.
Plymouth division of Chrysler Corporation really got it right in 1959. What a great example.
Oh, it's a beautiful car, actually. They didn't make that many Furies. That was the top of the Plymouth line, and made again like with Chrysler 300. It was the performance car of the Plymouth line, and they did a great job with this. This particular automobile has a high-performance engine and a great color combination, had a tachometer, clock, and a lot of accessories on it, and had the real forward look as Chrysler promoted in the late 50s.
This is the best example that I've ever seen of a 59 Plymouth. Just the restoration is flawless. Everything about this car is flawless. How do they get to this? Do you have a facility that you do the restoration on cars, or you buy them in this condition, or do you farm them out to somebody to do them?
Yes, we farm a lot of things out. We've got about we got about 3 or 4 cars out right now in the restoration with different people, and we try to buy them now complete. I've been through the mill on restorations. Today it's a lot safer and a lot cheaper, if you will, buying them restored, because the labor costs and material costs today are very, very high, and even an ordinary car costs you over 6 figures to restore. So you can buy a car like this under 6 figures, all restored and ready to go, and not wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however long it takes to restore them.
This facility must be a mecca for car lovers. Of course it is, but do you have, and at the event center here, you have, well, tell us about clubs that come here or corporations that come here. How do you blend the two?
Well, we have a variety of events that take place here. Some are corporate meetings where they hold sales meetings, orientation meetings. We're open for anniversary parties or birthday parties. We're having a birthday party coming up in about a couple of weeks with some executives. So we try to accommodate most groups between 100 and 500 people. We could take a big group, but sit-down dinner is difficult for anything over 500 or 600. But it's kind of geared for those who are car lovers or museum lovers or people who like to see different things and enjoy a lunch or a dinner and incorporate some excitement instead of just going to the bar and getting inebriated because you can't stand the meeting. Mm-hmm. So we offer other diversions that will keep people diversified and entertained while they're here.
1936 Chrysler Airflow, very unusual design for the time.
Oh, wow. To me, believe it or not, I was a young kid and my father had a client. He was an attorney, and his client came over one day to pick him up and going to take him to a football game. And I said, Dad, I would love to take a ride in this thing. He said, well, I'll ask Mr. Agajani, he'll take you for a ride. So I got in this car and I thought, I've never seen like it or the ride it had. Fabulous car, Chrysler Airflow, too radical for the time. Aerodynamically way ahead of its time, but the public just couldn't handle the differential of the early 30s and mid 30s to go this far that soon. So Chrysler didn't do well with this car. It came out in 34, 35. By 36, they dumped it and went to conventional they called Airstream. And during this period, they also made an Airstream, and they sold more Airstreams than Airflows. So, but to me, I was delighted to get one. I've been looking for one for 10 years. I finally got one. And to me, it's a fabulous car, fabulous driving car.
What do you think it is that gets young people interested in cars? You say you fell in love with this car when your dad's doctor friend had one and you wanted to ride in it. What do you think it is that made that passion flower in you where the next kid could care less about some car sitting out in front of their house?
Well, I think I kind of went for the design and some of the mechanics. Performance wasn't that big a deal for me, but if I see a great car going down the street and had a beautiful design to it, I just got turned on. I became an art major, believe it or not, later on, and I designed a few cars myself. They're not in production, of course, but I had a lot of fun designing cars when I was in junior high and high school and was going to go to art center school, but the war came along, and before the draft got me, I volunteered for the Air Force, and off I went. But I love the design, and that was part of my excitement.
The designs now of the big three, what do you think of what's going on with the industry now?
Well, I think the big three kind of got left behind a little bit. And as I mentioned to you before our interview here, I think they're losing some of the good, solid foundations of these manufacturers in America, where the car really came into focus and became plentiful. And the automobile manufacturing made America, in my opinion. And they built beautiful automobiles. And as the imports came in, they thought they'd never be seconded. But they've had some problems, as you probably know, in the last few years, and it's too bad. They've got to go back to the fundamentals, the roots, design, performance, and durability. That's my opinion.
So do you think making new Camaros that they're coming out with that look like old Camaros, and new Chargers that look like old Chargers, and new Mustangs that look like old Mustangs, do you think that's a smart move, or do you think that is them admitting that we can't come up with anything new, so we have to rely on what worked in the past?
Well, I think the retro look is in. I think that's a very big part of it. People love the vintage Mustangs because they're a beautiful design. If you look at a 64, 65 Mustang, it was a beautiful automobile for the price and the aerodynamics, performance. So I think they lost something when, as you know, Mustangs went into some very strange configurations. And finally, toward the end, they're now making a Mustang that looks like a Mustang should look, and even the retro look is bringing him back into the showroom.
1939 Packard, very special car. This is a beautiful rebodied one with some very interesting history.
Yeah, this is a 39 Packard Frenet, custom bodied by Frenet, custom body company out of Paris. It was built for the Paris Auto Show in 1939. And they built one of a kind, and it was for sale, and an aristocrat bought it at the end of the auto show in 1939. Unfortunately, he only had it for about a year because the Nazi occupation of Germany and Paris, I should say, France in 1940, they confiscated the car, and General von Braun used the car for 4 years until the Allied forces took over, occupied Paris, and then the American generals, I think Bradley used it, also Mark Clark used it, so it was under the supervision of the American troops and American motor pool of the Army. So it has a lot of history to it, but it's a gorgeous car and has a special body design, and it's very unique because it's the only one of its kind.
So both friend and foe were riding around in this car.
That's right.
The color combination, was that done that way back then, or is that?
Yeah, Frenet was very famous for a two-tone, especially black and cream. It's almost like a yellow cream car, but they always gave it a kind of a special look to it if you see other Frenet body designs of American cars. So it's a Packard front and a custom body back, but the interior's done a lot of wood. It's got zebra wood in it, walnut, and some birch. It also has a bar in back with cabinets to hold perfume or makeup kits or pencil and pad for numbers that they want to write down. And it's a town car. The top goes back in the roof, and the chauffeur normally drives out in the rain or the hot sun until he's fed up with it, and they push the top closed.
The power plant on this?
This is a Super 8, which is a pretty powerful Packard. Packard in 39 had a 6 and had an 8 and had a Super 8.
We have had such a great time here at the Astor Classics Museum and Events Center. What a wonderful collection of cars. What a great guy Art Astor is to take us in and show us around. Thanks again, Art. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.